Okay, so in this gospel that we read this morning, this story was in the beginning. In the other gospels, this story is closer towards the end of their gospels. But it's the same event, and it is the Passover that all Jewish families observe annually, which is followed by the Feast of Unleavened Bread. These two events last a week, and they observe the freeing of the Jewish people from Egypt. So today, I want us to imagine that we're in the first century, and that Christianity is not a religion yet because Jesus the Christ is still among us. So as we get in the story, let's hear these words from Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 24. This is how our Passover tradition began when we were slaves in Egypt. And this is the night that we received our freedom from Pharaoh. And this is what we remember each year during this week-long event. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month is to be for you the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. If any household is too small for a whole lamb, they must share one with their nearest neighbor, having taken into account the number of people there are. You are to determine the amount of lamb needed in accordance with what each person will eat. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect. You may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lamb. The same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire with the head, legs, and internal organs. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat in haste, it is the Lord's Passover. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. This is a day you are to commemorate for the generations to come. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast. On the first day remove the yeast from your houses. For whoever eats anything with yeast in it from the first day through the 7th must be cut off from Israel. On the first day hold a sacred assembly, and another on the 7th day. Do not work at all on these days except to prepare food for everyone to eat. This is all you may do. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread, because it is the very day that I brought you your divisions out of Egypt. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. In the first month you are to eat bread made without yeast from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. For 7 days no yeast is to be found in your houses, and anyone, whether foreigner or native born, who eats anything with yeast, it must be cut off from the community of Israel. Eat nothing made with yeast wherever you live. You must eat unleavened bread. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go at once and select the animals for your sacrifices and slaughter the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood in the basin, and put some blood on the top and both sides of the door frame. None of you shall go out the door of your house until morning. When the Lord goes through the land to strike down the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the top of the sides of the door frames and will pass over that doorway, and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your house and strike you down. Obey these instructions as a lasting ordinance for you and your descendants. Okay, thanks for listening. That was a lot, but that's how important this was for our saints before us. And it's very repetitious, so that's how important these words were for them. So will you show, this is the temple. We're going to visit the temple today. And so this is an overview of the temple courtyards where we're going to be. So according to the Old Testament traditions, each year we would gather our families and we would travel to Jerusalem for the Passover feast. We would bring our sacrifice to the temple and give to the high priest and to offer God for our sins. We are not able to offer the sacrifice directly to God because that occurs in the part of the temple that is too holy for us, and only the high priest is allowed to enter that area. So if you'll show the next slide, please, and I'll see if I can. Can y'all see this? Y'all over here? So this is where we enter, and where all the dealings are going on, and we give our sacrifice to the high priest, and they take it in this area, and then they take it in, this is where the holies of holies is, this is the Ark of the Covenant. So this is where our sacrifice actually goes to God. But again, we're not able to take it directly in there because only the high priest is able to go in that area. So now let's get back into, here we go, we're back in the first century. When we get to the temple courtyard, we are greeted by the money changers, the chief priests, and the high priest, and they inspect our offering, and they determine that it's unsatisfactory. And over time, I believe that this event became a time that the religious leaders of the land found an opportunity to profit from the influx of pilgrims that came into the city and brought their gifts to God. But now let's get back into it. They just happen to have certified offerings, right? For us to purchase at a much inflated price that we could have bought elsewhere at a fair price, or that we would have brought with us from our homes. I can hear them now saying, "Such a deal I've got for you. Step right up here and pick out your sacrifice." The money changers, the chief priests, and the high priest profited from these people that came in, from us as we came in, just because they could. Many of the pilgrims on this annual journey would be like many of us and are living paycheck to paycheck and could not afford to purchase another sacrifice at these gouged prices. However, they, like us, have no choice but to purchase these sacrifices, because this is the time of year that we come to Jerusalem to offer our sacrifices at the Passover. Our sacrifices are determined by our financial status or the type of work we do. So cattle farmers would bring a calf, shepherds would bring a lamb, and those that don't raise animals would bring a dove or a grain offering. However, I'm not sure what happens when told that the sacrifice brought isn't good enough and that I must purchase another one from the temple court double dealers. Because it may be that the size of the sacrifice and therefore my status may be reduced because I can't afford the extreme cost of the replacement sacrifice. So since we're here for a week in Jerusalem, we probably brought our tents because there are likely not enough rooms available for the influx of people. And our income status more than likely prevents us from being able to purchase a room at the inn anyway. So do you see how this is working for those that travel these far distances? Not so well. Do you see how the chief priests, the money changers, were taking advantage of the guests in town? That never happens in the United States, does it? Maybe not as far as our offerings to God at our places of worship. But what about peak season during the winter at ski resorts, or peak season at the beaches during the winter, and the food that we purchase while we're there? I'm sure that those is the most expensive time during the peak tourist seasons. And how about payday loans? Those places are definitely taking advantage of the typically low-income people. So let's get back to our first century. We're in Jerusalem. When Jesus sees what is happening in the temple, he's infuriated. He sees that over time, this sacred time of year, a time that we offer our best sacrifice to God, has been turned into a time when those in powerful positions are oppressing the pilgrims, many of whom do not have the ways nor the means. He takes some cords and he makes a whip and he forces everyone, including the animals, to leave the temple area. Our scripture today tells us that he spoke sternly to those that sold doves. I don't know why he picked out the dove sellers, but he picked those out. Get out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a market? So besides this sacrifice that we offer, there's also a temple tax that we must pay during Passover. And this temple tax has been in place since the time of Moses. We learn this in Exodus chapter 30, verses 11 through 13, that one must pay the Lord a ransom in his life at the time he is counted. Then no plague will come on them when you number them. Each one who crosses over to those already counted is to give half a shekel, an offering to the Lord. So the temple tax started out as an offering to the Lord, but by the first century, it ended up being a tax collected to pay for the upkeep of the building. So while the purpose of the tax was to maintain the temple, I don't know, but I would guess that possibly some of the tax money collected was used to pay the chief priest, the high priest, and the money changers. And as our human condition works, they saw an opportunity for personal financial gain, which in turn tainted the reason for the pilgrims that journeyed to Jerusalem. We don't often see Jesus get angered, but today he was furious as to how the Passover pilgrimage had turned into a time to take advantage of families traveling to Jerusalem for their annual homage. And next Jesus tells everyone, destroy the temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days. And we have no clue what he's talking about. The physical building had taken years to build, and they were in the middle of a remodel that has been going on for 46 years. How on earth can Jesus raise it again in 3 days? Well, Jesus was talking about his body being the temple. The people in the first century and the disciples wouldn't understand these words until after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. So now as we prepare to celebrate Holy Communion during this Lenten season, let's think about the words that we'll say during the Holy Communion liturgy. And let's say them from the bottom of our hearts, and how grateful that we are to Jesus, that he took the cross for the saints that came before us, the saints that are coming, and for us today.